Chapter 9 of The Wheel of Fortune by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Fight on the Chesapeake. One of the most miserable objects in the world, even under the most favorable conditions, is a seasick person. But when the miseries of the malady is added a condition of refined persecution at the hands of a brutal enemy, the reader may have a slight idea of what Bert Hawley suffered during the next few hours. The boy had never been upon rough water before in his life. He was not at sea, it is true, but rough island waters will lay one out with an acute attack of what the French call mal de mer, literally sickness of the sea, as effectually as the broad Atlantic. Bert, however, came out of his physical trouble quicker than he would have done had he been permitted to remain below in the bunk. A rope's end, frequently applied to his limbs with fiendish delight by the rascal Rake, kept him on the move, and the seasickness soon dwindled in comparison. All this time the Polly was creeping down the bay under the fog to one of the oyster beds which the skipper of the scoop proposed to despoil for his own profit, in open defiance of the law. He had arms aboard, which he proposed to use against the lawful workers of the field if, as was probable, they would attempt to drive him away. Shortly after dinner, the skipper of the Polly judged by his soundings that he had arrived in a favorable locality for his business, and the crew was first to set to work with tongs, and, results proving satisfactory, the dredging machinery was put in operation, and then Bert got his first taste of what was in store for him. "We've hit a fine bed," remarked the boss of the outfit in high glee as the oysters were scraped up in great abundance. "Bet your life," replied Rake, who appeared to be at home in the business. "If the fog will only keep up, we'll have a load in no time. Work, you little monkey, work!" he yelled at Bert, flourishing the rope he held in his hand as a gentle reminder of what the boy might expect in case he allowed his energies to flag for a single moment. And Bert ere long began to wonder if there was anything harder in this world than oyster dredging under a brutal master. At 5 o'clock the wind veered round to another quarter, and the fog began to lift. In 20 minutes it was as clear as a bell, with the wind dropping. A large rowboat was bearing down on them from the point of land, under the lee of which they had been stealing the oysters. "Here they come, my boys!" shouted the captain of the Polly, taking his glass from his eyes. "There's 6 in that boat, and they've got several shotguns. We've got to see 'em and send 'em kittin' where they came from." He disappeared below and soon came back on deck again with an armful of shotguns. The men grabbed a gun apiece and prepared to resist the enemy. "Here, you young sea cook," cried Rake. "Take hold of that shooting iron and see if you can use it when the time comes, or it'll be the worse for you, do you understand?" A glaring eye and the tickling qualities of the rope's end compelled the boy to obey. But his blood was up, and had Rake been half observant of the indications, he would have seen danger in the boy's eyes. "Clear out of here, you darn pirates!" shouted a voice from the bow of the boat. "We'll go when we get good and ready," replied the captain of the Polly, making a funnel of his 2 hands. The man in the bow of the boat turned round and said something to his companions. They stopped rowing and lay on their oars just out of range, while the steersman fired a revolver in the air. This appeared to be a signal to the shore, for presently other men who had been gathering on the beach ran to a hut, and arming themselves with shotguns crowded into a second boat, pushed off and rowed out to join their comrades. This display of force did not intimidate the skipper. He muttered an oath, raised the rifle he held in his hands, and taking deliberate aim at the first boat, fired. The stroke oarsman half arose in his seat and clapped his hand to his right arm, his oars slipping from his grasp and drifting away. The shot, however, did not stop the progress of the boat, which was aiming for the sloop's stern, while the second boat was making a bee-line for her bows. The attacking party was soon within musket range, and the crew of the Polly opened fire with their shotguns. The men in the boat stopped rowing and returned the fire vigorously. "Why don't you shoot, you little monkey?" roared Rake with an oath, raising the stock of his gun to strike Bert. But just then the slug tore a livid gash in his cheek, and he dropped his weapon with a roar of pain and clapped his hands to his face. Bert seized Rake's gun and with his own retreated to the heel of the bowsprit. With his own shotgun, he fired both charges in rapid succession close above the heads of the crew, thus diverting their aim and thoughts from the oncoming boats. Pitching his gun overboard, he grabbed up Rake's weapon and fired it at the skipper's arm as he was leveling his Winchester for the 6th time. The rifle fell to the deck with a ringing sound, and the captain of the Polly staggered and flopped down on his haunches. "Drop your guns," ordered the boy peremptorily to the crew, "or I'll fire right into the crowd of you." Firing ceased from the deck of the Polly long enough for the boats to come up. Then a dozen husky fellows scrambled on board the oyster pirate, and the game was up. "Who are you, young fellow?" asked the leader of the attacking party, whose arm had suffered from the first rifle shot and was bound up with a red handkerchief. "My name is Bert Hawley, and I was kidnapped from the Great Oak Manor farm last night by a pair of these rascals, one of whom owes me a personal grudge. It's evident you're not one of them, and your plucky behavior has largely contributed to the capture of this pirate. You shan't lose anything by it." The pirates were put under arrest, the skipper and Rake being bound, as they looked to be dangerous ruffians to handle, as indeed they were. The anchor of the Polly was lifted and the sloop towed inshore. Bert soon ascertained that this spot was on the western shore of Maryland, several miles below Baltimore. The boy told of the vile treatment he had received on board from the scoundrel Rake, displaying livid bruises on his limbs as evidence of truth of his story. He received the sympathy and the admiration of the rightful guardians of the oyster bed. The prisoners were taken before a county magistrate, and on the strength of the evidence against them they were held for trial and sent to the county jail. Bert was complimented by the magistrate and invited to supper at his residence. Later on, a committee from the oystermen called at the magistrate's house and presented the boy with $100 as a slight testimonial of their appreciation of the plucky service he had rendered them that afternoon. Next morning he took a train for Baltimore. From there he took the afternoon boat for Wharton Creek, whence he walked over to the farm, presenting himself before Mr. Bates about dark. "Well, upon my word, Bert, where have you been these couple of days?" asked the proprietor of the establishment. "You'll hardly believe me when I give you the particulars of my remarkable adventure, but nevertheless I've been through the toughest experience of my life in the last 48 hours. Then Bert made a clean breast of the affair, and backed his words up with a copy of a Baltimore afternoon daily, which reported the scrap between the oystermen and the poachers, giving due credit to Bert, as well as stating in his own words how he came to be on board the pirate. As a matter of course, Bert expanded into a hero during the remainder of his stay on the farm. Everybody on the farm was sorry to lose Bert a week later when he packed his grip and George Bates drove him to the Wharton station to take the Huckleberry train for Clayton, en route for Philadelphia, where he had settled upon going. His wages, which Mr. Bates paid him in a lump, amounted to nearly $100. Altogether, he had $200 to start out in the world with. End of chapter 9.